Hello everyone. This week we have been examining the links between language, power, and nation. And in this lecture, I want to provide a little more depth into how power links to intercultural praxis. This week, you read the piece by Melissa Curtin, which examines language and linguistic hierarchies. She discussed the links between language and national identity, the concepts of differential belonging and social indexicality, and we explored how language is reflective of a historical legacy of colonization. In your online lecture from last week, you learned about the concept of imagined communities to help you develop a more concrete definition of a nation-state. All of this plays into how we interact with one another because it all plays a role in how our relationship to power affects our ability to engage in intercultural praxis. So in this lecture, we're going to dig a little deeper into those dynamics. And so first, it's important to think about two basic ways in which we communicate with one another. One-way and two-way communication. Going over these two basic concepts will get us thinking about how and when we speak, and more importantly, how and when we listen. As we go through each of these, imagine two people having a conversation with one another. In one-way communication, one person is the speaker and one person is the listener in certain settings. So one communication involves the speaker or the sender who sends the message. In other words, the sender is the person speaking. That person is sending the message to the other person who is simply receiving it. The receiver is not speaking back to the person. This is what makes it one-way communication. This is not a back and forth between two people, but rather a one-sided conversation where one person speaks and the other listens. So some examples of one-way communication include giving a command, but can also include seeing a performance. Like we don't typically speak back to the person on stage, or listening to the radio. Two-way communication is a bit different. Rather than one speaker and one listener, in two-way communication, both people speak and both listen. So the process of communication looks a little different. There is still a sender, and the sender is still sending the message to the listener or the receiver. However, whereas in one-way communication the receiver just listens, in two-way communication the receiver is able to provide what is called feedback. They are able to respond to what they heard. So rather than a linear communication style like one-way communication, the two-way communication is cyclical. Because when the sender receives the feedback, they can offer a new message to send to the receiver. Students are often tempted at this point to quantify one as better than the other. In a way, it's understandable, because two-way communication certainly allows for more meaningful conversation. And while one-way communication doesn't allow for that, it still has its place. And not only that, there are times when two-way communication is just impossible. Like, for example, if you're watching CNN and a politician says something that makes you want to yell at your television, as much as you might want them to, they can't hear you or respond. In communication, this is called context. Context refers to the information surrounding a communication event. And this includes things like verbal communication, the words spoken and how those words are spoken, nonverbal communication, so our body language and our facial expressions, for example, our environment, the setting, so like the physical location where we are, whether it's a public or a private location, and the type of communication it is, so whether it's phone, written correspondence, or face-to-face. It also includes sociocultural factors, such as social location and social stratification. All of these things are information that we use in either one-way or two-way communication. We are constantly reading each other and our environments when we are interacting with one another. And that final example on the list, social environment, the socio-cultural factors are very important. It is always important to remember that our communication doesn't occur in isolation from our social location. Our positioning can greatly influence how we speak to each other. One thing to always remember about language, as Curtin illustrated for you in her work, is that language is never neutral. How we interact with others can be a reflection of our social location. And what this means is that our communication happens within a system of structural oppression. The categories used to rank us, how they become internalized and institutionalized, how those institutions linked, combined form a system of stratification that can separate us from one another in multiple ways. And one outcome is that we often don't fully hear each other, especially if someone is coming from a position that we are not familiar with. So it is always important to remember that communication is structural. I cannot say this enough. It is not neutral, and there is never a time where our communication practices are separate from our social location. As such, communication occurs within a system of stratification. Our place within that system can come into our communication practices in a myriad of ways, such as how we speak and listen, the tone of voice we use, our body language, and our facial expressions in particular situations is influenced by our positioning, who we speak and listen to, and finally, who we ignore. In a global world, we are connected to people all over the world, many of whom we will never see face to face. And what is more, we don't often think about how we're connected to them, something we will explore further. But there are even people in our everyday lives who we don't pay much attention to, such as people in service jobs, even if it's just basic civility, like saying hello. So now what I would like you to do before moving on to the second lecture video is to complete exercise 6.1 to start kind of applying some of the concepts you've just learned.